Hello everyone. Tonight, we begin with a question about one of the most mysterious disappearances in world history. How could one of Africa's most powerful kingdoms, a realm praised by ancient empires and feared by its rivals, simply vanish into silence? Imagine walking alone beneath a sky smeared with the last color of sunset. Around you, enormous stone towers lean ever so slightly, each one carved with strange glyphs. Faces half erased by time, some still proudly upright, others cracked and sinking into the soil. You're in Aksum, deep in the Ethiopian highlands, where even the wind seems to pause before rushing through the silent obelisks. You're not here just to observe. You're here to feel what it was like when this city breathed, when markets buzzed with Egyptian copper and Roman glass, when the scent of frankincense danced in the air, and when the chant of priests echoed through stone churches. Before you snuggle into your blanket, hit like on the video and comment where you're watching from and what time it is there. It's so fun to know who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The moment your foot touches the earth of Aksum, there's a strange sensation, like the ground itself remembers. The carved obelisks, called stelae, pierce the sky with silent dignity. Some soar higher than a 7-story building. Others lean at an angle, as though bowing to history's weight. Koa walks a few steps ahead of you, his slender frame draped in a simple white shama. He's young, always fidgeting, adjusting his belt, running fingers over beads at his wrist. He hums nervously as he sketches something in a small journal. The lines of the tallest stelae now cracked in 3 places. Lonnie, poised and ever silent, kneels at its base, her hand tracing the rough surface with reverence. She wears a braid wrapped in a green cord, a marker of those trained in oral memory. "Can you hear it?" Tua murmurs, his voice like dust over gravel. The old storyteller grips a carved staff, each notch on it a tale. This one speaks of a prince, born during an eclipse, buried with gold lions and an army of carved servants. He chuckles. Of course, I might be misremembering. It could have been a baker. The stelae are tombstones, though not for just anyone. These mark the graves of kings, nobles, and those whose names no longer echo in written record. You walk past a trench in the earth where archaeologists once dug, brushing away soil, to find stairways descending to burial chambers filled with relics, ivory combs, bronze bowls, and glass beads that shimmer like the stars above. Koa picks up a shard of pottery and snorts. Still warm, he jokes, then tosses it gently back down. Lonnie rolls her eyes. Careful. Might be cursed. You pause and try to picture this place, not as ruins, but as living stone. The obelisks freshly carved the plaza, filled with color and clamor. Aksum wasn't always silence. It was once a city of loud debates, religious chants, clanging workshops, and children's laughter. Around 100 CE, the kingdom of Aksum rose from these highlands into an empire. Positioned perfectly between inland Africa and the Red Sea, it became a hub for traders seeking gold slaves, ivory spices, and luxury goods from across the ancient world. Roman merchants called it one of the great powers of their time alongside Persia and China. But even at its peak, Aksum kept secrets. Its stelae, for example, rarely mention battles or kings. Instead, they speak in symbols, giant eyes, curved lines, geometric patterns. Historians still argue whether these carvings were code ritual art or simply decoration. Some think they reflected a deeper cosmology, a way of mapping the world between the seen and unseen. Koa tilts his head, eyes narrowed. "You ever wonder why so many of them are blank?" he asks. "Maybe the story was told by voice, not stone? Lonnie replies softly. Words fade in air faster than in granite, but they're warmer. You crouch beside a smaller stelae, half buried in moss. The stone is worn smooth, but there's a hint of inscription. As your fingers brush it, you almost imagine hearing the sound of chisels tapping artisans arguing over spacing a king dictating words for his own eternity. Just beyond the stelae field, broken walls peek from under overgrowth foundations of old palaces, once layered with carved friezes and bright frescoes. Tua pauses beside one. This was a throne hall, he says, thumping the ground with his staff. Or a bakery, maybe both. He smiles again. Imagine holding a chisel in the humid morning light, crafting an obelisk destined to stand for centuries. How steady would your hand be? Would you trust your eyes or the whispered measurements of your master builder? These structures weren't just gravestones, they were announcements. Aksum was wealthy, skilled, and proud enough to speak through stone, and yet, all of this is gone. The empire that built these stelae minted coins, with kings' faces sent fleets across the sea, it faded. Faded so deeply that for centuries, Western historians doubted it ever existed. It was only rediscovered piece by piece like shards of a dream. You follow the group as they head toward a hill overlooking the entire valley. From here, the city's bones stretch into the distance. Faint ridges in the earth where roads once bustled, clusters of stone where temples stood. Smoke curls lazily from a far-off village where descendants still chant in Ge'ez, the language of ancient Aksumite priests. Some say the empire died from drought. Others blame war. Still others suggest trade routes shifted, cutting off Aksum's lifeline. But those are stories for another night. For now, you rest among the stones, listening to the wind whisper through carved granite and wondering if these monuments could talk. What would they truly say? As the stars brighten, Koa lights a small lantern and Lonnie begins to hum. The melody is old, almost aching. Tua leans back sighing. Every empire falls, he says, but not everyone sings as it sinks. The sun lifts slowly over the highlands, casting long golden shadows across the broken stones. Roosters crow from somewhere deeper in the valley, and the air is thick with the smell of roasted barley and wet earth. You wake on a mat beneath a thatched awning. The worn walls of a merchant's lodge around you, breathing with morning heat. Today is a trading day, and in Aksum, that means noise, color, and opportunity. The merchant quarter pulses with life. As you step into the alleyway, you're nearly knocked over by a boy chasing a goat shouting apologies in 3 languages. The smell hits neck-sizzling lamb fat, crushed coriander, and sweet spiced mead. You breathe it in, eyes adjusting to the riot of color around you. Bolts of dyed linen, baskets of myrrh, slabs of salt, pyramids of pomegranates, and wild honeycomb stacked like treasure. You pass Koa, bent over a market stall, trading a Roman glass bead for what looks like a South Arabian scroll. He grins at you, his hair messier than usual, the ink still fresh on his hands from last night's sketches. They say this script tells of a storm that swallowed 50 ships. Or maybe it's a wine recipe. Either way, we're rich. Across the square, Lonnie is engaged in what appears to be a silent negotiation with a Nubian cloth seller. She says nothing, only raises her brow, slightly gestures with one hand. The man, clearly flustered, drops the price by a third. Lonnie doesn't flinch, just nods and walks away with the cloth folded neatly beneath her arm. This is Aksum, not as a ruin, but as it was one of the great marketplaces of the ancient world. its traders navigated by monsoon winds reaching ports from the Arabian Peninsula to western India. The port of Adulis, far downhill toward the Red Sea, funneled treasures up into this city, elephant tusks, obsidian tools, even Chinese silk. Historians still argue whether Aksum's economy was more dependent on maritime routes or overland caravans. But here in this plaza, it's clear they mastered both. Aksumites spoke multiple tongues. They minted their own coins, one of the few sub-Saharan African empires to do so, and their currency circulated alongside Roman denarii and Byzantine solidi. Feel that Tua says, appearing beside you, his carved staff clacking softly on the stone. That hum in your chest. That's coin and spice dancing together. That's the song of trade. You follow him past rows of weavers and bakers, potters, and herbalists to a quieter courtyard where bronze is being cast. A burly man pours molten metal into a mold shaped like a lion. The air sizzles and sparks dance upward like fireflies. You blink and wonder, is this lion meant for a throne, a temple, or a child's toy? Imagine holding one of those coins in your hand. It's warm from the sun, stamped with the face of King Ezana, and glints with deliberate precision. Aksumite coins bore both pagan symbols, like crescent moons and discs, and later crosses once Christianity took root. Few empires have minted coins that charted their religious transformation so clearly. You see, this koa shows you one such coin, later flipping it neatly. Pre-cross, he says, pointing to the disc and crescent. Sun and moon. Then boom. Ezana finds Christ, and suddenly everything's about the cross. Christianity had arrived early in Aksum, earlier than in most of Europe. By the 4th century CE, under King Ezana, Aksum officially adopted it, making it one of the first Christian empires in the world. Some say missionaries from Alexandria came by sea. Others whisper about shipwrecked priests and dreams sent by angels. No one can quite agree, and that's part of the charm. Lani, sitting on the temple steps, leafs through an ancient codex bound in goatskin. There's a line here about a star that burned brighter than 10 suns, she murmurs. It guided a boy to a cave where he met a man in white robes. Maybe it's metaphor, or maybe not. Koa scoffs. Or maybe someone mixed up their spice wine again. Even with the jokes, you feel the reverence in the air. Religion in Aksum wasn't something distant or abstract. It lived in murals and chants, in hand gestures and incense. As you pass a church built low with thick stone walls, you glimpse priests chanting in gaze, their voices rising like morning mist. The scent of frankincense floats through the narrow window slits, curling into your lungs. Imagine the trust it took Tua says quietly, to follow a faith brought by strangers from the sea, to change your gods, your songs, your maps. And yet, Aksum did. The empire adapted constantly. Even as it grew wealthy through trade, it absorbed and transformed the cultures it touched. South Arabian architecture influenced its stone buildings. Greek appeared alongside Ge'ez in inscriptions. Egyptian and Jewish communities lived here too, in neighborhoods where traditions braided and coexisted. You pause before a stone inscription halfway up a temple wall. It's written in 3 scripts, Greek, Ge'ez, and Sabaean. The trilingual monument proclaims a king's conquests, his piety, and his generosity in equal measure. It's like a press release etched in rock, and it tells you, this Aksum was not only powerful, it knew it was powerful, and it wanted the world to know too. Try saying that aloud, Koa dares. You do, and the words tumble from your tongue, awkwardly, ancient, and sharp. He laughs. Not bad. You'd make a decent court herald. As the sun climbs higher, the market thins slightly. Children dart between stalls, elders nap beneath shaded awnings. Lonnie offers you a sip from a clay jug. It's TG honey wine, sweet and sharp. You taste both the flower and the fire. Imagine living your whole life in a place like this, she says softly. Every day, a new ship, a new tale, a new scent. But there's always another side. Near the edge of the square, you spot a chained figure being led by guards. He's not Aksumite. His features suggest a foreign land, a slave, a prisoner. It's not clear, but it's a reminder that wealth in Aksum, as in so many empires, came with costs, human and hidden. You look back to the heart of the city and feel the thrum of something immense. A kingdom poised between worlds, between past and future, belief and barter. How long can such balance last? Tua looks at you, eyes crinkling. Now, the real stories begin. When things seem perfect, that's when the wind changes. The square has quieted. Morning's bustle has dissolved into a sleepy lull, the sun hanging hot and steady overhead like a polished bronze shield. You sit with your back against a low stone wall, still warm from the heat of the market's flames. Your eyes drift toward the temple complex across the plaza where thick stone pillars cast long, unmoving shadows. Inside, a voice is rising steady, melodic, almost too soft to notice. It's Lonnie. She kneels beneath a carved arch, palms resting gently on her knees, lips moving in slow, reverent rhythm. You can't quite make out the words, but the tone is unmistakable. A chant ancient and sorrowful spoken in the old tongue of Ge'ez. This isn't for show. This is her own ritual, quiet and precise. You step closer, careful not to disturb her. On the wall behind her is a faded fresco, a young man raising his arms to a crescent moon, while behind him, a figure in robes holds a cross half hidden in the dark. A symbol of transition, or maybe of tension, as Anatua says behind you, with a sigh that almost sounds like a song. The boy king, the one who turned Aksum to the cross. Do you know his story? You shake your head. Koa sits nearby, picking at a fig, and already preparing to interrupt with a dozen sarcastic remarks. But Tua only smiles and begins his voice just above a whisper. He was young, barely older than Koa when his father died. Still soft-cheeked and unsure. His kingdom was caught between faiths, between traditions of the ancestors and new whispers from the sea. But one day, they say he saw a vision. You lean in. They say a blinding light pierced the temple roof. And in that light, a voice called him to follow the path of the stranger, Frumentius the teacher from abroad. Historians still argue whether Izana's conversion was political strategy or genuine revelation. But whatever the reason, he was baptized, quietly, in secret. Lonnie opens her eyes, still focused on the mural. And everything changed, she murmurs. Izana's conversion was no small matter. It reshaped the kingdom. The gods of the old Aksum Maram Beher Astar began to vanish from the stelae. Temples to the moon and sun were repurposed into churches. Festivals changed. Even the coinage shifted. Sun discs were replaced with crosses. Within a single generation, Aksum had aligned itself with the Christian world, becoming one of its earliest and most surprising members. Imagine the courage, Lonnie says softly, to change your gods while still wearing a crown. But was it courage or calculation? After all, aligning with the Christian powers of the Mediterranean might have ensured Aksum's place in international trade. A Christian king could negotiate more easily with Byzantium, with Alexandria. Perhaps Ezana's vision was as much about silver and ships as it was about saints. Koa leans back against a pillar, smirking. You think he saw a divine light, or just a really convincing wine merchant? Lonnie ignores him. She reaches into a satchel and produces a small relic, a carved wooden cross no bigger than her palm, the edges worn smooth. This was found buried in a child's grave, she says. 5th century, give or take. Before churches even had bells here, Aksumite Christianity, she explains, was different. It blended the old and the new. While churches rose in the highlands, you could still hear ancient hymns at moon festivals. Priests wore white linen robes like their ancestors. Baptisms happened in riverbeds, once sacred to other deities. You imagine walking through Aksum at twilight in that era, torches glowing along the temple walls, chants in Ge'ez drifting through the air, the occasional clash of worlds as old rituals faded and new ones took their place. Would you have embraced the change or clung to the familiar? Picture this, Tua says, motioning around the courtyard. One corner has a scholar quoting Paul, the other a stone carver praying to Maram for steady hands. That was Aksum. Not one thing, many things. You walk through the temple, noticing how some symbols were chipped away. Others were left untouched. A sun disk here, a fish symbol there. It's as if history itself hesitated, unsure which faith would win. Which faith? In one corner, you find a half-buried baptismal font, dry now, but still smooth and round. You run your fingers along its edge and feel the cold memory of water. Lonnie joins you, her expression thoughtful. You know what I love most about Ezana, she says. He didn't erase the old gods out of fear. He just outshone them, Koa chuckles. Or maybe he just had better PR. You exit the temple as bells sound from a distant church tower, soft and irregular, but undeniably present. The sound blends with the rustle of fig trees and the quiet murmurs of a people caught between epochs. Outside, a funeral procession passes. Men and women in white shawls, walking slowly, chanting. The body is wrapped tightly, the face hidden. A young girl scatters flowers from a woven basket. You watch in silence, a lump forming in your throat. The chant they sing isn't Christian. It's older. It has no words, just breath rhythm and grief. Tua bows his head. We honor the new ways, he says, but we remember the old. The sun begins to descend, painting the sky with honey and rose. Shadows stretch longer. The obelisks stand taller in this light, casting sharp silhouettes across the ground. You think again of Ezana, of the moment he stood between two worlds, heart beating fast, unsure of the consequences. Lonnie looks at you. Would you have followed the voice in the light? And you don't answer. Not yet. Because that light still flickers in the corners of your mind and the path it offers may not be so easily walked. A soft wind rises before dawn, and with it comes the sound of rustling parchment. You find Koa hunched beside a small fire, his knees tucked under his chin, unfurling a weather-stained scroll. It crackles as he rolls it flat over a stone slab, anchoring the corners with pebbles. He doesn't notice you at first. His lips move as he mutters to himself, finger tracing swirling lines, inked in fading brown waves, port stars and dotted paths that stretch across seas. He looks up, bleary-eyed but electric with excitement. Monsoon winds, he says, grinning. They weren't just lucky guesses. Aksum's traders mapped them. You kneel beside him, feeling the smooth coolness of the parchment beneath your hand. The scroll isn't decorative. It's worn at the edges, torn in places, but it's clearly been used. Often, they say Koa adds that if you left Adulis in July, you'd hit India like a sling stone. But if you tried in January, you'd drift back toward Arabia belly up like a dead fish. The Aksumite port of Adulis, hundreds of miles downhill to the southeast, was one of the busiest on the Red Sea. There, Aksumite captains rubbed shoulders with Persian traders, Arab spice merchants, and Indian sailors who shared stories of cyclones, celestial omens, and whales the size of temples. Historians still debate how far Aksum's ships really sailed. Some say they reached only as far as southern Arabia. Others claim they made it as far as western India or even Ceylon. One surviving Greco-Roman document, the Periplus of the Erythraean Sea, lists Adulis as a key stop on a vast trade web that funneled pepper tortoiseshell and silk toward Rome. "Look here," Koa says, tapping a faint smudge. "That might be Baruch, or it could be someone's spilled coffee. Either way, this route is genius." You squint at the messy lines. Some curve sharply inland, suggesting rivers or caravan routes. Others snake along coasts, pausing at ports where water and wind dictated destiny. Monsoon knowledge. Lonnie says behind you, her voice still morning rough, was power. You missed your window, you starved at sea, but time it right. She gestures upward toward the sky, where stars begin to fade, and the winds carry you like a whisper. She crouches, pulling a small seashell from a pouch and pressing it into the soft dirt. This shell map, she explains, was used for training navigators. Each shell is a reef, a current, a storm season. They didn't need charts, they felt the ocean. You try to imagine it. The creak of a wooden hull, the salt drying on your skin, the way the stars tremble in the water's reflection. Would you have had the nerve to set sail on a stitched-together ship, trusting in the pull of the wind and the tilt of Orion's belt? Imagine holding the tiller, Lonnie says. How heavy does it feel in your hands? Koa holds out the tiller-shaped stick he's carved and smirks. Heavy enough to regret eating so many figs. You follow them down a worn path toward the edge of a cliff. From here, you can almost see the Red Sea, a distant silver glint between the folds of mountains. Adulis lies far beyond that ridge, though today only ruins remain. But imagine it then, Tua says, appearing beside you with his staff. Docks groaning under sandalwood crates, cranes lifting elephant tusks, children chasing monkeys that escaped from foreign ships. Aksum's dominance of Red Sea trade wasn't luck. It was engineering strategy and a deep understanding of wind. Seasonal monsoon cycles dictated the rhythm of commerce ships, left with one wind, returned with another, timing their voyages like clockwork. Some say they even used astrolabes, Lonnie murmurs. Others say they just listened to the sea, the birds, the clouds. It's easy to forget just how advanced Aksumite trade networks were. They didn't just import goods, they exported influence. Coins minted in Aksum have been found as far as southern India. Roman artifacts, glass amphorae, have been unearthed in Aksumite soil. It was not a backwater kingdom. It was a connector, and yet it remains oddly invisible in many Western histories. Why? Tua shrugs. Perhaps because its greatness made no noise when it fell. No fire, no last stand, just silence. You rest your hand against a slab of red stone where an old inscription lists weights and measures standards used to tax incoming goods. It's math, but sacred math. A way to count the world and keep it balanced. Lonnie holds up a fragment of pottery painted with vines. Imported, she says. But the clay Aksumite. She smiles. They copied the world, then made it their own. A passing shepherd leads a row of goats down the slope, singing softly in a language that feels ancient yet alive. One goat pauses to sniff your foot as you sit and watch the sun rise over ancient trade routes, now buried beneath soil and time. A strange sadness creeps in. The scroll Koa carries is just a copy. The shell map is more memory than manual. The great harbors are silent now, the cranes rusted, the spice warehouses long emptied. But if you listen closely, maybe, just maybe, you can hear the creak of sails, the flap of canvas, the soft chant of sailors calling out stars by name. Next time we visit Adulis, Koa says, stretching, I'm buying a ship, and naming it what Lonnie asks. He considers. The unsinkable fig. She groans, you'll sink before the fig rots. Tua laughs so hard he coughs. At least write that name in 3 languages. For history. The wind shifts. A warm gust rises from the east, brushing your face like a whisper from a forgotten captain. The kind who once charted stars with a shell and steered kingdoms with the wind. The fig-scented laughter fades behind you as the day stretches longer and warmer. By now, the market's voices have quieted to a hum, and the distant hills shimmer in the heat. You follow a winding stone path uphill toward a shaded grove where a fig tree sprawls like an old matron over a sunken court. Beneath its twisted branches, cushions of woven grass are laid out in a circle. Bowls of roasted grain lentils and honeyed flatbread rest nearby. You're not alone. This is a feast, not the royal kind, but one of quiet ritual. A circle of scholars, scribes, traders, and priests gather here every full moon to speak, to remember, and to listen. Koa arrives late, his fingers ink-stained again. He slides in beside you, biting into a roasted chickpea. Lonnie is already seated across the circle, her braid newly woven with fresh green cord. She holds a small palm leaf scroll in her lap, tied neatly with red twine. Tua, leaning heavily on his carved staff, takes his place at the head of the gathering. He gives a nod, and a boy nearby strikes a small drum, once, then twice. The rhythm settles the group. Aksumites, you begin to understand love rhythm. In their speech, in their walking, in their eating, there is cadence and patience. A young woman rises cradling a lyre. She plays 3 notes, soft, deliberate, and begins a song. It's an old hymn, but not Christian. This one is older. It speaks of a lion with silver claws who guarded the first well dug in the highlands, of a priestess who wove rain into ropes to bind a drought. You let the words flow over you, though you don't understand them all. Some are gaze, some are in a dialect spoken only in 3 villages north of the border. But the meaning comes anyway, like heat soaking into your bones. When the song ends, Tua raises a hand. Tell me, he asks the group, how do we remember what we no longer see? Koa raises his eyebrows. Easy, write it down. Lonnie counters quietly. Not if no one reads it. The conversation stirs like smoke. Around you, each person shares a tale, a forgotten hero, a family recipe, a carved prayer staff passed down 300 years. You begin to see how memory lives, not just in books or coins, but in food, in gestures, in shared silence. Then Lonnie unties the red cord and begins to read. It's the account of a royal feast from the reign of King Caleb. Banquets for the Byzantine envoys. Platters of roasted goat basted in mead. Dancers from the coast whose anklets chimed like temple bells. But beneath the glory, a quiet note, the court's silence on Caleb's failures in Yemen. His grand campaign there, meant to spread Aksumite influence across the sea, had ended in confusion and withdrawal. Historians still argue, whether Caleb was forced to retreat or chose to, whether it was strategic humility or political disaster. But Lonnie's scroll reveals something else. The court spun it as a holy mission, and when it faltered, they simply rewrote the ending. Truth bends, she says softly, to match the rhythm of survival. Tua nods. Like a fig branch in wind, the feast continues with stories, each one richer than the last. A priest recalls a ritual where water was poured over a bronze lion's mouth to summon rain. A spice merchant swears his grandmother once met a queen who wore an entire city's worth of rubies. Each tale is a morsel sweet or bitter, and together they form a feast far greater than the food on the plates. And speaking of food, the flatbread is tangy with fermented teff, the lentils smoky with ash from figwood. Honey is drizzled over dates, and a clay jug of tej makes its way around the circle. When it reaches you, you sip slowly. It's thicker than wine, golden and wild on the tongue. You're asked to share something, not a fact, but a feeling. So you speak of the stelae, the way they lean, as if straining to whisper across time. You speak of how the obelisks breathe in silence, and how the first time you saw them, you didn't feel like a visitor. You felt like you had returned to something older than language. The group is quiet for a moment. Then Tua taps his staff once against the ground. That, he says, is how Aksum remembers. As dusk creeps in, fire pots are lit, and their smoke curls upward, carrying cinnamon and pine. Koa lies back on the grass arms behind his head, watching the sky. Do you think he asks the people we talk about, the kings, the priests, the sailors? Do you think they'd recognize us? Us, sitting here eating their food, telling their stories, Lonnie answers, without opening her eyes. If they had eyes to see, yes. You hear a rustle in the fig branches above. A crow, perhaps, or something older. It watches, then flies, and its wings beat the air like a drum of memory. Imagine sitting in that circle. Would you speak, or only listen? Would you share your own lineage? Or would you simply be a shadow among other shadows? This isn't just nostalgia, it's survival. In a land where paper rots, where coins melt and monuments fall, memory must live in mouths and meals and midnight songs. Tua leans close as the others begin to rise. History doesn't always need heroes, he whispers. Sometimes it only needs witnesses. You nod, unsure whether he's talking about you or himself. The fig tree's branches sway gently, the stars just beginning to blink awake above. The feast ends, but the stories do not. You rise slowly, the scent of lentils still on your fingertips, and follow your companions back down the slope toward the sleeping city. The stars are still out when you rise the next morning. Not the wide, gentle sky of the lowlands, but the sharper stars of the highland night. Closer it feels, and somehow more judgmental. You've left the city behind. No more temples. No more markets. Only dry hills, winding paths, and the soft crunch of packed earth beneath your sandals. Tua leads the way, his staff tapping a slow rhythm. Beside you, Lonnie walks with quiet precision, one hand brushing a string of beads at her waist. Koa, of course, is trailing behind, distracted by a grasshopper, a bird, a curiously shaped stone, anything but the path. We follow the old caravan trail, Tua explains. Before the wheels, before the salt mules. This was a whisper road for goods and secrets. You crest a ridge and see it, the faint curve of a trade route etched into the land. It winds through scrubby hills toward the northwest, where centuries ago, camel caravans once snaked like beads on a necklace bound for the Nile. Aksum's greatness didn't only come from the sea. Its inland reach stretched far, following river valleys and highland ridges into Nubia and even toward Egypt. Long before Rome became an idea, this path hummed with movement: elephants hauling ivory merchants, carrying obsidian and hides priests, walking barefoot, with sacred incense packed in goatskin. Historians still argue whether Aksum dominated these inland routes through diplomacy or sheer control. Lani murmurs, stepping carefully over a dry wash. But no one questions that they owned the flow. You kneel near an old stone outpost, just a few scattered blocks now, mossy and worn. But once, it was a resting place. Here, traders would have unpacked bundles, counted coin, offered prayers to traveling gods. Koa picks up a piece of worked obsidian and whistles. Sharp, he says. Good for cutting, or for threatening someone who's short on silver. Lani rolls her eyes. That's why no one takes you to negotiations. As the sun climbs, so do you. The road narrows, curving around terraced hillsides where teff once grew in layered rows. Now, the terraces are empty, dusted with dry weeds and scattered pottery. Yet somehow, the land still feels expectant, as though waiting for footsteps to return. Tue pauses at a flat stone slab, an old milestone, barely legible now, but once it bore Ge'ez's script naming distances to the next well, the next toll station, the next waypoint. They say he begins that once a year, elephants were led down this road in full adornment, bells on their ankles, painted trunks, tusks wrapped in gold-threaded cloth. Not for war, for tribute. Aksum knew how to impress. You picture it, a line of elephants, swaying through the dust, traders, bowing children, gaping drums, keeping rhythm. No empire survives without spectacle, and Aksum was master of the silent show. At midday, you reach a grove of tamarind trees, roots clawing the soil like ancient fingers. Tua sits with a sigh, removing his sandals. Here he says the caravans would stop to rest. And listen for what you ask. He smiles, for stories, for deals, for lies. Indeed, this spot was once a meeting place, a neutral zone where Aksumite agents and foreign traders exchanged goods and gossip. Information moved here faster than horses. If a southern kingdom planned a rebellion, this is where whispers came first. If gold mines ran dry or Nile floods failed, this is where the knowledge bloomed. Imagine, Lani says, eyes closed, the tension in the air, not knowing if the next merchant brings spice or swords, or a marriage proposal. Koa adds, munching a dried fig. You never know. You laugh, but there's truth there. Political marriages were common Aksumite nobles, linking with Arab or Nubian houses to secure trade. Love, it seems, was just another form of diplomacy. You follow the road again in the late afternoon. The terrain becomes rockier, the heat heavier. Your feet ache and your water skin grows lighter. But then around a bend, you see it, a caravan very much alive. It's a reenactment, but a convincing one. Donkeys and camels, their packs jingling. Women in layered cloth balancing baskets. A boy driving goats ahead with a stick. As they pass, they nod respectfully. You nod back, heart flickering strangely. You're not watching history now. You're inside it. Tua greets one of the traders, an old friend it seems. They speak in a local dialect, fast and full of laughter. When they part, the man leaves you a gift, a carved wooden box smelling faintly of myrrh, tribute, Tua says, with mock grandeur. To honor your blisters, you camp at the edge of a dry riverbed. Lani builds a small fire, and Koa prepares spiced lentils with more enthusiasm than skill. The stars begin to show again, this time brighter, freer from city haze. Lani hums an old song as she stirs the pot. Not a hymn this time, something playful. Something that once might have echoed along these hills after a successful trade. Think about it, she says. All this gold faith knowledge, it didn't flow from a throne. It flowed from people, walking, talking, eating lentils, just like us. You sit back, the fire's warmth curling around you like a blanket. The road behind you is long, the path ahead uncertain. But here, in this forgotten bend of a forgotten trail, you understand something. Empires aren't only built by kings. They're stitched together, step by step, by ordinary feet. Tomorrow, Tua says, we visit the place where the road met the Nile, where Aksum spoke with Egypt, where faith tangled with fear. But tonight, he adds, stretching out on the ground, let the stars do the storytelling. Dawn arrives in silence. No cockerels here, no market chatter, just the rustle of dry grass and the crunch of boots on gravel as you rise and begin walking again. Today, Tua says you'll reach the place where the caravans turned north, where Aksum's grip once stretched toward the mighty Nile. The terrain shifts beneath your feet. The gentle hills give way to a starker landscape, exposed rocks, sun-bleached ridges, sharp escarpments that cut the horizon like broken pottery. You're walking into the frontier zone, a borderland always in flux. You feel that Tua asks as a gust of wind kicks up a swirl of dust. You do. The air is thinner here, drier, less forgiving. The type of land where loyalty is bought in salt, not promises. And in these hills, Aksum's ambitions collided with its limits. Aksum was never just a trading kingdom. It had teeth, armies, and ambitions that stretched beyond commerce. You can almost hear the marching feet as you follow the trail of stone markers, each one notched with inscriptions that fade like old scars. This path once carried troops, thousands of them, heading toward Nubia, toward conflicts that simmered just below the surface. Koa squints at a broken milestone. Warriors rode elephants here, right? Sometimes, Lonnie says. But mostly they walked, spears in hand, singing. Aksum's military campaigns in the Nile region were well recorded by their own kings, though always with just enough embellishment to stir suspicion. One such king boasted of subduing 300 tribes in a single sweep. Another claimed his soldiers marched until the sun burned silver. Historians still argue whether these were literal campaigns or poetic flourishes, but the stakes were real. Aksum's hold-on trade depended on controlling routes, not only the Red Sea ports, but the overland paths that led to Nubian goldfields and the grain routes of the Blue Nile. And so war came, not in blazing conquest, but in skirmishes, occupations, political interference. Aksumite kings placed puppet rulers in distant cities, sometimes marrying into local elites, sometimes using brute force. And the war drums, they didn't roar. They echoed steady, rhythmic, meant to unnerve and hypnotize. Imagine the sound, Lonnie murmurs, tapping her thigh in rhythm. Low, like thunder you feel in your teeth. You pause near a stone platform, the ruins of a military outpost. Just a few blocks remain their corners squared with geometric perfection. But around the base lie scattered bones of pack animals, buried weapons. The air still feels heavy with waiting. Tua kneels and uncovers a carved pendant shaped like a lion, the Aksumite symbol of strength. He wipes it clean with a cloth, then hands it to you. Wear it, he says. Might protect your dreams tonight. Nearby, Koa climbs atop a jagged boulder and raises an imaginary spear. I name myself General of the Fig. Lonnie throws a pebble at him. Your troops would fall asleep mid-march. You laugh, but the truth behind the joke lingers. Aksum's armies were feared not for their numbers, but for their discipline and coordination. They marched with precision, carrying iron-tipped spears, curved swords and shields painted with clan sigils. Women sometimes followed, not just as camp followers, but as healers, advisors, even spies. At midday, the heat turns brutal. You shelter beneath a stunted acacia tree, sharing dried meat and flatbread. Tua tells a tale of a queen general, a legend perhaps, who commanded an army dressed in copper and fire. She never spoke before battle, he says, just raised her hand, and the silence cracked like lightning. Do you believe that Koa asks? Tua shrugs. I believe she made enemies dream of her. That's enough. You resume your trek, and just before dusk, you see it, the ghost of a fortress clinging to a cliffside. It was once a checkpoint, Tua explains, guarding the entrance to the Nile corridor. All who passed, traders, soldiers, envoys, were weighed and watched. Now only shadows remain. Lonnie walks ahead and touches the stone gate, whispering a prayer too soft to catch. Her fingers trace the pattern of vines etched into the wall, half worn, but still there. Koa lingers near a rusted spearhead, tapping it with a curious toe. And you step through the gate and feel the air change. Beyond it, the road descends into a narrow valley. You hear water. Not much, but enough. A trickle, a whisper, and suddenly, there it is, a tributary of the Nile. Shallow now, barely more than a stream, but in ages past, it was wide enough to carry barges, to float hope and conquest. You kneel beside the water, cup it in your hands. It smells of clay and memory. This, Lonnie says, kneeling beside you was power, not a throne, not a sword, but this thin ribbon of water. Whoever controlled it shaped the world. Aksum knew that. And so they fought. They negotiated. They bled. But they didn't always win. Tua tells of a campaign that ended in disaster, an entire regiment lost in a flood-swollen valley. Another starved out during a long siege, and another betrayed by a local king who had once sworn loyalty. History remembers the victories more kindly, but the land remembers both. As the stars rise, you build camp near the river, listening to the faint trickle, the soft chirr of night insects. You think of Aksum's kings, Ezana, Caleb, Wazaba, each one trying to stretch the empire further, deeper, longer, trying to hold the wind in their hands. And you wonder, not for the first time did they ever stop to listen to the silence. Koa pokes the fire with a stick. Think they knew it wouldn't last. No one knows? Tua says, settling against a rock. That's the joke. You never know it's ending until you're already halfway into the fall. You lie back, eyes full of stars. The Nile whispers on, indifferent and eternal. And above the sky, watches in silence just as it watched Aksum rise, march, and one day vanish into its own horizon. The river recedes behind you as the journey turns eastward. You've walked through the valleys of power, the corridors of war, the rhythm of boots on soil. But today, the trail winds towards something quieter, something deeper. Stone rises ahead a hill, not carved by empire, but worn by centuries of prayer. You're approaching the shadow of Aksum's ancient cathedral, no longer used for mass, no longer echoing with the voices of robed choirs. The church now stands in half light, its stone blocks blackened by age, its wooden doors swollen, and stuck its windows empty holes that look inward rather than out. But still, it stands, and the scent incense dust and old beeswax clings to the air like memory. Lonnie walks ahead of you. She doesn't speak. Instead, she runs her hand along the wall, fingers pausing at an ancient carved cross, simple, weather-worn, yet precise. A symbol, once whispered between converted nobles, later chiseled proudly into coin and crown. You follow her inside. The floor creaks, not with wood, but with a sound older than material, the hush of breath held in awe. Light filters down in slanted beams through the open roof, catching dust motes that dance like spirits. This is where it began, you realize. The moment Aksum turned inward, Christianity hadn't just arrived, it had settled thick and slow, like wine left to age. After Ezana's conversion, churches like this sprang up across the highlands. Some were simple, built by hand with limestone and faith. Others, like this one, were monumental, declaring to the world that Aksum was no longer just a trading empire. It was now a chosen land. Listen to us says, stepping into the dim light. You can still hear them. The monks, the scribes, the kings who prayed here asking not for gold, but for clarity. You close your eyes and try. And yes, there's something. Not voices, not music, but presence. A kind of stillness that only exists in places where generations have emptied their fears into stone. Koa doesn't kneel. Instead, he peers at the faded frescoes along the north wall, half erased by smoke worn by time. One shows a figure in white standing before a mountain, holding a staff with a serpent wrapped around it. Another shows a ship at sea surrounded by lions in the waves. Not literal, you guess. Symbolic. A language painted an image. Historians still argue whether these images are biblical or local legend, Lonnie whispers. Aksumite Christianity blended both. No sharp lines, just rivers that crossed. In the apse carved niches hold what remain of sacred books, goatskin codices, some barely legible. One lies open on a stone plinth, pages curled, ink faded to brown. Giez script flowing like a prayer written in wind. Lonnie leans forward, murmuring the words. You can't follow them all, but you catch pieces. The light was not fire. The stone opened, and the voice said, "Go east." You're not sure whether it's a psalm or a parable, but it feels true. More than true. Necessary. Outside the cathedral, the world is still. A few goats pick through scrub. A boy no older than 12 sits with a flute blowing soft, uncertain notes that flutter through the air like fragile birds. And yet in the stillness, attention stirs, because while the faith of Aksum deepened, the trade routes began to falter. It happened slowly. A missed caravan here, a ship delayed by shifting winds, and then silence. Christianity gave Aksum identity, Tua says, sitting on the cathedral steps, but it also turned its gaze inward. While the world changed, the kingdom prayed. Some say Aksum's isolation grew deliberate, a way to protect its purity. Others argue it was political rivalries with Jewish and pagan neighbors, or distrust of the rising Islamic caliphates across the sea. Historians still debate whether this spiritual inwardness caused Aksum's decline or merely accompanied it. Imagine, Koa says, being so busy building churches that you forget to build ships. Lonnie shakes her head. Or maybe they just didn't want to serve two masters anymore. You wander behind the cathedral, where a monastic path leads uphill. At the top, cut into the rock, lies a single stone cell, carved by hand. Just enough room to sit, lie down, and whisper to God. This, Tua says softly, was where the last bishop of the old city prayed. For guidance, for rain, for a sign. You sit inside, letting the silence wrap around you. It's not empty. It's full. Full of years of sighs of decisions no one remembers, but which still shape the world. Would you have stayed, you wonder? Would you have turned from trade and conquest to candlelight and ink? Would you have chosen prayer over power? When you exit, the sun is low. The shadows stretch long over the stones. Lonnie begins a chant, not loud, not formal, but like a lullaby hummed half to herself. Koa joins her off-key but honest, and slowly you hum too. Because, in this moment, it doesn't matter whether Aksum rose or fell, whether its kings ruled or vanished. What matters is that someone is still singing. By the time you descend from the cathedral, the city feels different, not louder. No, Aksum remains hushed in its stones and shadows, but emptier. The streets that once buzzed with carts and chants and clinking coin now echo with footsteps too few and eyes that look toward the horizon too often. You walk beside Koa down a narrow street lined with old stucco walls. Many are cracked. Some houses are abandoned, still adorned with carved lintels, but their doorways choked with vines. Lonnie trails behind her fingers, gently brushing the walls, reading the story, not written in scrolls, but in decay. You stop outside a squat building, a mint, or what remains of one. Inside, the air is cool and bitter with the scent of old metal. A single beam of sunlight pours through the hole in the roof, landing directly on a flat anvil-like stone, stained with green and black. This, Lonnie says softly, was the heart of Aksum's voice. She points to a low shelf filled with round metal discs, unfinished coins, blank slates. Beside them, a few worn dies, intricate engravings of crowned kings, crescent moons, and later finely inscribed crosses. You pick one up. It's heavier than you expect, cold, unyielding. It takes force to make a mark that lasts. In its golden age, Aksum minted coins in gold, silver, and bronze, each bearing the likeness of rulers like Ezana Caleb or Wazaba. These coins traveled far. They've been found buried in Indian sands and Roman ruins, each one a tiny ambassador of a faraway kingdom few had ever seen. Koa holds a gold coin to the light. This guy, he says, pointing to the stylized face stamped on the front, looks like he knows he's winning. But there's something else here too. Something more recent. A pile of dull copper coins, many of them poorly struck. The inscriptions smudge the imagery vague. Some don't even bear a king's face. Just symbols. Just guesses. You kneel beside them and realize these were desperate mintings. You can almost hear the clatter of the forge as the metal cooled too quickly, the hiss of quenched failure. You see the eyes of a mint worker, tired, uncertain, wondering if these new coins will pass in the southern markets or if merchants will laugh and walk away. The gold dried up, Tua says, from the doorway, first slowly, then all at once. Historians still argue why. Perhaps the mines in the West were exhausted. Perhaps the trade routes failed and bullion stopped arriving from distant ports. Or perhaps it was political disputes, blockades, rival empires, flexing their weight. Regardless, the result was the same. Without gold, Aksum's currency lost credibility. And with it, so did the kingdom's reach. You imagine being a merchant during those last years, arriving in Adulis, expecting gold coins for your incense or silk, and instead receiving these copper imitations. Would you trust them? Would you return? Trade runs on trust, Lonnie says. And broken coin breaks trust faster than broken words. Koa flips a coin high into the air. It lands with a dull thud. It still feels like money, he says, but it no longer buys what it once did. Lonnie replies. Outside the mint, a narrow canal winds past. Dry now, it once carried water from the nearby hills, feeding workshops, cooling metal, and slaking the thirst of men who labored through smoke and fire. The canal walls are etched with old graffiti, simple lines, stick figures, even a lion with a crown. One inscription reads, "In the year of the hunger, we minted prayers." You walk the canal path, winding past abandoned forges and workshops. Some are half collapsed, their roofs sunken like old chests. Others are still as if waiting for the return of workers who will never come. Aksum's decline wasn't a fire, it was a dimming. The city's lights didn't flicker and vanish. They dimmed gradually, like the wick of an oil lamp left too long. The trade ships became fewer. The gold became copper. The prayers became longer. Tua leans on his staff and sighs. Every empire forgets that fortune has a tide. You reach a small plaza where a coin exchange once stood. It's empty now, except for birds nesting in the rafters and a stone ledger table split in two. On the far wall, a painted mural survives just barely. It shows two men shaking hands across a pile of scrolls and coin. One wears a white robe, the other red. Lonnie studies it. An agreement, she says. Trade. Or maybe peace. Koa scratches his head. Or maybe they're just arguing over lunch. You laugh, but it's a quiet laugh. This place demands that. The decline of gold meant more than lost money. It meant lost confidence. Aksum had once been loud with certainty. Its coins sang. Its stelae boomed. But now even its whispers echo. As the sun lowers, you sit on the edge of the broken mint and watch the sky turn to bronze. The city below glows for a moment in that golden light it once commanded so confidently. And then slowly, it dims. Would you have stayed? Lonnie asks, not looking at you. In the final years, when the markets dried and the coins felt like lies, Tua answers for you. Some stayed, some prayed, some left. You don't know your answer. Maybe no one does. Maybe each coin minted in those last days asked that same question. Is this hope or is it habit? Above you, a crow caws. A goat bleats. The silence creeps back in, and just for a second, you think you hear the ring of a hammer. A coin struck. One last time, the wind off the southern hills carries a different scent, now drier, thinner. Less of incense and cooked grain, more of dust, old wood, and something else absence. You follow the path that once led south toward the ports. The road narrows as you walk, its edges crumbling into the earth as if even the stones themselves are trying to forget where they once led. Once this was the empire's lifeline, a winding artery down to the Red Sea toward the port of Adulis. But now, the scent of salt is faint. The air carries stories instead of sails. Koa walks ahead, unusually quiet. His satchel swings lightly, and for once he doesn't fidget. Lonnie walks beside you, reading the shape of the path more than its direction. Tua trails behind, leaning on his staff harder than usual. You wonder if the silence presses on him too. Do you smell that? Koa finally asks, stopping. No fish, no brine, nothing. He's right. Where once you would have heard gulls, the call of dock workers, the ring of ropes tightening, now there's only wind and memories. You arrive at what was once a bustling rest station, stone benches, shaded courtyards, and carved signposts in 3 languages. But weeds crack the pavement. The benches sit crooked, and one of the signposts has fallen half buried in sand. Adulis was the jewel of Aksum's coastline. A deep water port, it connected the highlands to Arabia, India, even Rome. Ships carried ivory, frankincense, tortoiseshell, and gold downriver out to sea and back, with silks, glass, and spices. The wealth of the empire flowed through here, but today you pass crumbling walls, salt-stained docks where no ropes hang, an old anchorage where no ships sit. The skeleton of the port is still here, but the life has drained away. Adulis didn't burn, Lonnie says softly. It just stopped breathing. Historians still debate why. Was it rising competition from Islamic ports, earthquakes that shifted the harbor floor, or the gradual silting of the bay? choking the ships that once danced across its surface. No single answer fits cleanly, but every answer feels like a kind of betrayal. You step into an old warehouse. Inside, pottery shards scatter across the floor. Some are stamped with markings from India, others from Arabia. One bears a faint cross, an Aksumite seal. You hold it in your hand. It's light, fragile, and deeply, irreversibly still. The scent of frankincense fades, Tua says, kneeling in the corner, fingers trailing the grooves of a shattered amphora. Trade moved on. Wind changed. And we, he smiles dryly, didn't. The world shifted in the 7th century. Islam spread rapidly through Arabia and along coastal trade routes. New powers rose. Alliances changed. The flow of goods turned toward Mecca, Medina, and Cairo. Aksum, rooted in the highlands Christian and inland, found itself slowly walled off by a sea it once commanded. Lonnie points to a stone marker near the edge of the dock. It's etched in Sabaean script, older even than Aksum. We weren't the first, she says. We won't be the last. You walk out onto what remains of the quay. It juts into the bay, cracked but proud. For a moment, you close your eyes. Imagine the creak of a wooden ship, the calls of traders in 5 tongues, the hiss of oil on cooking fire, the scent of spice and wet rope. Then open your eyes and find silence. The bay is calm, too calm, its surface glassy, untroubled. No ships, no seagulls, no noise. You think it hurts? Koa asks suddenly. To be forgotten. Lonnie doesn't answer, but she picks up a small pebble and tosses it into the water. The ripple spreads delicate and brief. Maybe that's what Aksum felt. Not a dramatic collapse, but a ripple. You sit on the edge of the dock legs, dangling. Tua joins you, groaning a little as he lowers himself down. He hands you a wrapped bundle of dried figs and flatbread. You eat in silence. Food tastes different when surrounded by absence. We built our glory on wind, he says. But wind does not ask permission to change. Later, you find a wall in the ruins where someone long ago carved a message. It's not a decree or a law. It's a sentence. We waited for sails. None came. You stare at it for a long time, because that, more than any textbook, tells you what decline feels like. Not an explosion, not a fall, but a slow waiting. A breath held too long, a prayer without reply. As the sun sets, you walk the ruins once more, not to search, but to feel. And you do. You feel the weight of silence, the ache of longing, the way a harbor can grieve its ships. On the way back, Lonnie stops to collect a piece of sea-worn glass, once a window, now just a cloudy shard. She slips it into her pouch without a word. Koa kicks a rock into the sand. If I had a ship, he says I'd name it the Last Frankincense, and I'd sail till someone remembered. You smile. Maybe he would, but tonight there are no sails, only stars above a quiet sea, and the memory of a kingdom that once made the world turn with the rise of its harbor smoke. The journey inland resumes beneath a sky the color of smudged parchment. You leave the coast behind, climbing back into the highlands where the air is thinner, cooler, and every breath feels like it's brushed with memory. The road is quieter now. Even Koa doesn't speak much. Lonnie hums under her breath, a slow, wordless tune that rises and falls with each bend of the trail. Tua walks with a limp today, but he refuses help. His staff clicks against the stones like a metronome, counting down something no one wants to reach. And then one morning, the wind changes. It's dry, fierce. It carries dust that bites at your cheeks and eyes. You wrap a cloth around your face and press on, following the others toward a low ridge overlooking the plain. From the top, the view opens. What lies below isn't a city, not anymore. You see sunken walls, some just outlines beneath the earth. Empty canals, cracked cisterns, terraced fields, now overtaken by scrub. Once, this valley had been green, a breadbasket for the highland cities. Now, it's thirsty, fractured still. Look there, Lonnie says, pointing. The Tekeze River, or what's left of it. You squint. A thin silver thread winds along the valley floor. It gleams weakly in the sun, barely moving. The river that once sustained farms, filled aqueducts, and bathed kings has withered to a whisper. You descend into the ruins. The air is heavy, not with sound, but with absence. Imagine living here centuries ago. Waking to the sound of oxen in the fields, drawing water in carved clay jars, laying out lentils to dry under woven screens. Now, the only things drying are bones. Tua crouches near a cracked irrigation ditch. The lifeline failed, he says. The weather turned, or maybe the gods turned their eyes. Historians still debate the cause of Aksum's environmental decline. Was it deforestation, overfarming? A long cycle of drought made worse by imperial expansion. Whatever the reason, the outcome was cruelly simple. The water faded, and so did the people. You follow an old footpath that winds between abandoned homes, stone walls, thick with moss, doorways half collapsed. One has a hearth, still intact, blackened with soot. Nearby, a child's clay toy rests on a ledge. You don't touch it. Imagine boiling water here, Lonnie whispers. Feeding a family. Praying for rain. But no rain came. You pass what was once a temple, a small one, built of red stone. It has collapsed inward, but you can see the outline of an altar, and along one wall, a carving, a droplet cradled by hands. Prayers for water, Tua says. Before the wells ran dry, Aksum's farmers were brilliant. They carved terraces into impossible hillsides, dug cisterns, managed floodplains. But even brilliance has limits. Without rain, genius is thirsty. You reach a dried-up reservoir. It's deep, easily 20 feet, and ringed with steps that now lead nowhere. At the bottom, weeds grow between cracks. Lizards dart across the dry stone. It hasn't held water in decades. Centuries, perhaps. Koa drops a pebble into the center. It lands with a hollow clack. What happens, he asks, when even the prayers go unanswered? The wind answers with silence. You sit beneath a dying fig tree whose roots cling desperately to the wall of a collapsed granary. Lonnie offers dried fruit and stale bread. It feels appropriate. This was the moment, she says, when belief was tested, not in gods, in continuity. When the river dried, Aksum faced its cruelest question. Could it survive without what it had always depended on? Some tried. They built deeper wells, planted hardier crops. Others left carrying what they could on their backs and in their bones. Some turned to faith, others to silence. Tua unwraps a bundle from his satchel, a brittle scroll, its edges crumbling like ash. It's a hymn written by a priest during the last famine. He reads, "The river does not answer, but I sing. The field does not rise, but I kneel. The gods do not speak, but I remember." You close your eyes and listen, not to the wind, not to the hymn, but to the silence between them. It's not empty, it's full of waiting. You visit one last house, tucked into a hillside half swallowed by earth. Inside, a storage jar lies on its side, cracked cleanly as if placed there, not dropped. On the wall, a faded painting, two figures standing beneath a tree that no longer exists. Their hands are raised, not in fear, not in anger, in farewell. As the dusk falls, you and your companion sit beside the reservoir. The sun sets behind the hills in a blaze of copper and ash. You think this was the end, Koa asks. No, Lonnie says gently. Just the beginning of the forgetting. Because Aksum didn't vanish in flames or blood. It dimmed like a lantern in the wind until even the echoes couldn't find their way home. You lie back and stare at the sky. Stars appear slowly, cautiously, like they're unsure whether they're welcome. And in that hush beneath those watching stars, you feel it, the heartbreak of a river gone quiet. The next morning arrives, not with sunlight, but with fog. A thick, slow mist has crept down from the highlands, curling through the ruins like fingers searching for something lost. You move carefully, your steps muffled the ground, damp beneath your feet. It's as though Aksum has pulled a blanket over its face, too tired perhaps to be seen. Today, there are no roads, only memory. Tua leads you eastward, away from the valleys toward the edge of a plateau where only birds and old stories travel freely. He doesn't say where you're going, only that some things are seen better in silence. You climb in single file, breath visible in the morning chill. Koa slips once on the mossy rock and mutters under his breath. Lonnie helps him up without a word. She walks more slowly now, too less sure-footed than usual. Even she, it seems, is weighed down by what's been seen. By midday, the fog begins to lift, revealing a landscape that is barren yet beautiful, rolling hills, scarred with gullies, broken terraces, and what appear at first to be boulders, but they're not. They're ruins, not of homes or temples, but of cities. You stand on a ridge, overlooking a vast basin, once filled with life. Aksumite settlements dotted this region, like constellations, each one a point in a network of farms, roads, and rituals. Now, they are ghost prints, walls barely taller than your knees, gates reduced to two leaning stones, entire districts smothered by soil and root. Welcome, Tua says softly, to the map that forgot itself. This is the Aksum no guidebook mentions. The post-glory Aksum, the one historians still argue over, because here in these hills something happened. Not a war, not a fire, a movement. The empire, weakened by drought, trade collapse, and isolation, did not vanish. It shifted. The court moved south, or perhaps east, into higher, more defensible terrain. Into mystery. Kings still ruled, but they ruled from shadows. From valleys unnamed in royal inscriptions. You descend into one of these ghost cities. The fog is mostly gone now, and the sun is returning. In the light, the stones shine faintly gold. You see a broken lintel still bearing Ge'ez script, a staircase that leads nowhere, a threshold smoothed by centuries of passing feet. But no one is here. Koa walks the remains of what must have been a central square, kicking pebbles. This wasn't a fall, he says. It was a retreat. Lonnie nods and retreats, leave lighter footprints. Historians still debate whether this migration was planned. Was it an organized shift of power, or a slow, desperate scattering of a people trying to preserve something, anything, in the face of collapse? You crouch beside a stone block, carved with the faint outline of a cross. It's not well made. The lines are crooked, shallow, hesitant. It's a far cry from the proud carvings of old Aksum, but somehow it feels more human, more real. Someone made this long after the temples were empty. Someone still believed. You enter the ruins of a small church. Its roof is gone, but its apse remains sheltered by a cliffside. Inside, a faded mural shows a ship with torn sails and a single eye painted on its prow. A symbol of exile, Lonnie whispers, or endurance. You sit quietly on the old stone steps. Dust settles in your lap. The wind hums through cracks in the stone. A hawk circles overhead. Tua settles beside you. This is where the stories fray, he says, where records end and the rest becomes song. You ask him what he means. He gestures to the hills beyond. Some of the descendants stayed. Some became hermits. Others wandered. Some of them became tales. Others became stone. There's a sadness in his voice, not just for the loss, but for the fading, the blurring of lines between fact and memory. And yet, there's something beautiful here too. In the broken walls, you see care. In the empty doorways, you feel echoes of laughter, of songs sung by candlelight, of meals shared even when the harvests failed. Not every fall is ruin. Some are reroutings. You walk to the edge of the village and find a well sealed with a slab of stone, but still ringed with prayer beads. Someone comes here, still, to leave offerings, to speak, to remember. Lonnie kneels beside it and murmurs something you don't quite catch. Koa joins her and drops in a small coin, one of the bad ones, the copper ones, the ones that didn't matter once. But now, that coin feels holy, because it was left with love. And love, you realize, is what made Aksum endure, long after its power vanished. As the sun begins to dip, Tua raises his staff and begins a chant. It's not long, not complex, just a repeated phrase in Ge'ez that rolls like thunder through the still air. You ask what it means. He smiles. We are still walking. That night you camp in the ruins. No fire, just stars. The kind that watched the stelae rise and the trade ships sail. The kind that saw kings pray and rivers die. And now, those same stars look down on you, on broken walls, a sealed well, and 3 companions who refuse to forget. You lie on your back, hands behind your head, and whisper the phrase aloud. We are still walking. And somehow, it feels like a promise. Morning unfolds in pale gold as you descend from the ghost village, the silence lingering like dew on your shoulders. The trail winds through long grass, occasionally broken by stone markers, whose inscriptions are too worn to read. They aren't there to guide anyone anymore, just to remind you someone once walked this path before. Tua moves slower today. His limp has stiffened, and he leans heavily on his staff. Still, he hums as he walks. It's not a happy song, but it has rhythm enough to carry a tired body forward. Koa is quiet. Not his usual sulking, but a thoughtful quiet. He walks ahead now, his steps careful, deliberate, like he doesn't want to disturb whatever ghosts still dream in this soil. Lonnie trails behind her fingers, toying with a length of woven grass. Her eyes are distant, though they flick to the horizon every few minutes, as if watching for something she can't quite name. You're all tired. You've crossed ruined cities, empty fields, dried up rivers, forgotten ports. And still, the question remains, why did Aksum vanish? Today, perhaps you'll begin to understand. Because today, Tua says you'll visit the map that only sings at night. You walk all day, the landscape growing more wild. Thorns catch your tunic. The trees are twisted and close-knit. Eventually, the trail fades entirely, and you're walking by instinct, Tua's instinct, to be precise. And then as the sun lowers, you arrive. Not at a town, not at a palace, at a field, flat, quiet, surrounded by ringed stones and half-buried markers. But as the last of the daylight slips behind the hills, something changes. The wind shifts. The stones begin to glow, not with light, but with story. Tua lights a single lamp and places it in the center of the ring. Its flickering glow touches the carved faces of the stones, revealing patterns, some geometric, some resembling waves, animals, stars. This, he says, is the ghost map. You sit in the grass, cross-legged, the lamp's glow warming your hands. Lonnie opens her journal and begins to sketch. Koa unwraps a packet of dried fruit and tosses one in his mouth without comment. Tua begins to speak. They say when the kingdom fell silent, it did not vanish. It folded into the land, into the hills, into the bones of the people who stayed. These stones he gestures are not graves. They are anchors. Each one holds a tale. He taps one stone with his staff. Here a hunter who fed an entire village through 3 winters of famine. He carved this mark after his last hunt. Another stone. Here a priestess who walked from lake to lake, carrying a candle that never went out. And another, a boy, no name. Just this he traces a spiral, and the phrase, "he saw the storm and stood anyway." These aren't royal tales, they're human ones. Aksum's survival, it seems, wasn't in gold or stelae or armies. It was in these quiet lives, ordinary, faithful, stubborn. Koa stares into the lamp flame. So, that's what was left. Tua doesn't answer immediately. He just watches the flame. Then, he says, "History counts the kings, but the land remembers the walkers." You look around and feel that these people weren't erased. They were absorbed. Their names may have faded, but their echoes remain in these stones, these trails, this language still sung in twilight. Lonnie stands and begins to chant softly. Not a hymn, not a lullaby, just names. Dozens of them. Some real, some half-remembered, some invented to fill the silences. You realize what this place is. It's not a ruin, it's a memory engine. Each night, as stars rise, the stories are sung again, not to preserve power, but to preserve meaning. Historians still argue about the fate of Aksum, whether the state fractured or merely faded, whether it became the foundation of later Ethiopian kingdoms or was quietly buried beneath them. But here, none of that matters, because the people didn't stop walking. Even as the gold vanished, the fields cracked, and the winds betrayed them. They walked. They farmed, prayed, sang, loved, left marks on stone for those who came after. You rise and place your hand on one of the stones. It's warm from the day's sun, rough against your skin. The carving is simple, a figure walking with a star above its head. Koa stands beside you. "I'd carve a fig," he murmurs. "Just a little one, maybe 2. You smile. "Just make sure it's walking." Tua chuckles behind you. That's the spirit. The lamp flickers lower, and the fog begins to roll in again. Not the same heavy fog of earlier days. This one is lighter, gentle. A shawl, not a curtain. You lie down in the grass, eyes skyward. Stars blink slowly into place. And then Lonnie's voice drifts across the field again, soft, steady. She sings of rivers and footsteps and a kingdom that never truly left, only paused, waiting for someone to listen. And as the last line fades into the hush of night, you know something for certain. Aksum didn't vanish. It whispers still. The next morning breaks. Not with a sunrise, but a hush. A kind of sacred stillness that settles over everything: trees, stones, voices, thoughts. Even Koa doesn't speak. He just sits on a flat stone, sketching the faint outlines of the ghost map, while the mist curls around his ankles like a slow, ancient river. You're not far now. That's what Tua says, though far has begun to lose meaning. It's not about miles anymore. It's about layers. You're peeling back the veils of a kingdom that even in its fall refused to vanish all at once. Today's path is narrower, wilder. A deer crosses in front of you without fear. Birds fly overhead, silent in their wings. You pass trees twisted with age, their trunks carved with shallow spirals, offerings perhaps, or warnings. No one knows anymore. And then the forest opens. A clearing stretches before you, carpeted in golden grass. In its center stands a structure that doesn't quite look like a temple, nor a house, nor a fortress. It's something else. Low walls of black stone form a perfect circle. Inside, a single platform rises flat, wide, edged with simple carvings. Around it stand dozens of stone stelae, none taller than a person, all different. Each one leans slightly inward, as if listening. Lonnie gasps softly. This, she says, was the last gathering place. You step into the ring. There's no roof, no altar, no throne. But the feeling is undeniable. This was where decisions were made. where the last councils of Aksum met, not in marble palaces, but beneath open sky, surrounded by reminders that they were not alone, that every word they spoke echoed into time. Koa runs his hand along a stelae carved with an open eye. Watching, he mutters. Even now, Tua lowers himself onto the central platform with a soft grunt and exhales. Some say this was where the kings became voices. No more crowns, no more armies, just memory and silence. You sit beside him. The stone is warm. The grass rustles in the breeze, and somewhere nearby, a bird calls out. Once then falls quiet. Lonnie walks the ring, slowly pausing at each stele. Her fingers brush each one. She's not reading. She's listening, because this is what Aksum became, not a forgotten ruin, but a living hush, a place where the noise of empire gave way to the discipline of memory. You ask Tua if the kings really met here. He shrugs. Some say yes. Some say this was a sanctuary, a waiting room for those who chose not to leave. Leave, Koa asks. History, Tua replies. You think of all the places you've walked, the broken mint, the dry canals, the silent harbor, the cracked reservoirs, all the pieces that once fit together like gears in a clock, now scattered, stilled. And yet, the people didn't vanish. They climbed higher into the hills. They built new settlements, churches hidden in cliffs, monasteries carved into living rock, quiet kingdoms ruled not by gold, but by liturgy and stone. The world moved on. Byzantium fell. Arabia surged. Europe forgot. But Aksum, it watched and waited. Lonnie stops in front of the central platform and begins to speak, not in chant, not in song, but in steady words. She tells the story of a woman who carried scripture across 3 mountain passes, who buried it beneath a fig tree and told no one where, who died smiling. Koa adds one of his own, of a boy who carved maps with bone, then swallowed the bone to keep them secret from raiders. Tua leans forward. This is why we came, he says, not to answer the question, but to ask it better. You sit quietly, letting it settle, because that's the lesson here. Empires don't vanish. They soften, they pass into custom, into proverb, into bread recipes and lullabies. They become the curve of a shepherd's trail, the rhythm of a chant, the way a pot is fired, the angle of a roof. You press your palm flat against the stone. It's smooth, cool, and full, not with power, but presence. Aksum was never meant to last, as Rome did loud recorded hammered into textbooks. Aksum survived differently, by folding into the world around it. You look up at the stelae again. One has a spiral, another a single word in Ge'ez Malka, journey, or exile, or maybe just path. You smile. You've walked it. You've felt the wind that once carried ships, heard the coins that once sang, drunk from dry wells, stood in a cathedral whose roof had surrendered to the stars. And now, at the end of the trail, you see it clearly. Aksum didn't end. It became quiet, a choice few empires have ever made. The sun begins to fall, casting the ring in amber light. The grass glows. The stones seem to lean in closer. And for a moment, just a moment, you feel as if the whole kingdom is listening with you, not demanding anything, just waiting. You rise and bow your head not to worship, but to witness. Then follow the others down the trail, the hush behind you, deep but no longer lonely. It feels like a promise, like the next step of a journey, not yet finished. Night falls slow and wide as you leave the ring of stones behind, not with a crash, not with fear, but with that kind of fading light that doesn't so much end the day as fold it. One moment, the world is golden. The next, it's velvet stitched with stars and heavy with memory. No one speaks much on the way back. You, Koalani, and Tua. Walk in single file, the path narrow, and marked only by the sway of grass that's been bent before by other feet. You follow it down the ridge, past fig trees and the ruins of field walls, past wells and empty homes that by now feel like friends. You're not returning to the city. You're returning to a camp just beyond it. One last rest before the end. You arrive after midnight. The fire is already lit, its smoke rising gently into the cool sky. Tua lowers himself to a woven mat with a quiet groan. Lonnie sits near the edge of the firelight, her face half-lit, half-shadowed fingers tracing invisible patterns in the dirt. Koa flops down and throws an arm over his eyes, groaning. "Do all empires end in sore legs?" he asks. You smile. No one answers, because now, finally, there's nothing left to chase. You lie back and stare upward. The sky above Aksum is deeper than most, more ink than light, more silence than sound. And above you, the constellations shift gently, as if dancing around some slow truth you're only beginning to understand. Tua clears his throat. "Let's remember," he says. And you do. You remember the stelae field where the dead still speak in stone and shadows, the merchant square alive with figs and coin and smoke-slicked chants, the whispered story of Izana, the boy king who traded gods for a cross and changed the empire's shape forever, the creaking scroll in Koa's hands that mapped monsoon winds and ocean dreams, the feast beneath the fig tree where memory was passed not in books but in songs and lentils, the footsteps of caravans under moonlight moving gold and ghosts through the highlands, the drumbeat of war that once echoed between valleys and the quiet morning it left behind, the shadowed cathedral where Lonnie read prayers older than scripture carved in soot and soul, the smell of copper coins and fading trust in a mint whose fire no longer burned hot enough, the ruins of Adulis where the sea went quiet and sails stopped answering prayers, the dry riverbed whose silence spoke louder than any flood, the song of the ghost map carved by ordinary hands that refused to forget, the slow, soft march of retreat, not as defeat, but as transformation. And finally, the ring of stones where the last voices chose to speak in whispers. Every moment has built to this. Every footprint, every crumb of pottery, every faded mural and cracked coin and echoed hymn has brought you here not to answer the question of why Aksum vanished, but to understand what it became. Because Aksum never truly disappeared. It rearranged. It slid into hillsides, into kitchens, into monasteries carved into mountainsides so hidden that even empires forgot them. It lives in the script of Ge'ez, still chanted by priests in dawn-dark churches, in the angle of a plow pulled across a terraced field, in lullabies, in how silence is kept at funerals, in how bread is broken. That is the truth of Aksum. Its kings fell, its cities dried, but its culture never died. It just grew quiet. Still here, still walking. You sit up and look at your companions. Tua's eyes are closed, but his lips move with a prayer. Not one from a book, but from somewhere deeper. Lonnie is asleep, her braids still looped with that green cord, now worn to pale thread. And Koa is snoring softly, one hand still gripping the edge of a page, as if he's dreaming in ink and dust. You feel something in your chest. Not sadness. Not even awe. Something softer, something like peace. You reach into your satchel and pull out a smooth, flat stone you picked up beside the sealed well. With your thumbnail, you carve a simple line into it, a crescent above a pair of footprints, a moon, a path. You place it gently by the fire. You don't need to tell anyone. They'll know. The embers flicker low, the wind shifts, and from somewhere, whether it's the hills, the stars, or the very soil itself, you hear a voice. Not words, but presence. And you understand finally, Aksum wasn't just a kingdom. It was a memory machine. It taught its people how to remember even when the rest of the world forgot. And as long as someone walks, its fields touches its stones, sings its hymns or dreams, its maps. It lives. It listens. It waits. It remembers. Thank you truly for joining me through every emotion, every turn, every moment of this journey. It's been an adventure, and I'm grateful to share it with you. As we close this tale, I wish you a peaceful evening. May you have a restful night, deep sleep, and dreams filled with wonder and light. Rest well, you've earned it. And when you're ready for the next story, I'll be here waiting to journey with you again. Before you go, if you loved this tale, please leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear what moved you, surprised you, or lingers with you long after the story ends. Until we meet again, good night, and see you in the next adventure.